Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, Cameroon starts national dialogue in a bid to end years of fatal Anglophone secessionist fighting. But key opposition voices boycott the talks, jeopardising their effectiveness. Also, the years of instability in Cameroon have cost civilians dearly. We meet some of the victims trying to overcome the physical and psychological trauma they've suffered during the years of the crisis. And the US will be pulling funding from Kenya's National Blood Bank in October following a decision by President Donald Trump. The country now faces a race to beef up its blood supplies on its own, whilst in the midst of an ongoing shortage. But first, Cameroon started government-led talks on Monday aimed at ending a 2-year Anglophone secessionist insurgency in which thousands of people have been killed. Now, tensions first began in late 2016 following fatal crackdowns on protests calling for more English to be used in schools. That escalated into guerrilla fighting between soldiers and militants. However, on Monday, key opposition and separatist figures boycotted the week's dialogue, meaning that they are unlikely to go far in really making a difference on the ground. Nicolas Germain tells us more.
President Paul Biya, who's been in power for nearly 4 decades, has called it a major national dialogue. Hundreds attended, but Biya did not come, and neither did the major secessionist leaders. Many Anglophone politicians wanted the talks to be held on neutral territory. Prime Minister Joseph Dion-Gouté spoke in English.
It is in order to put an end to these acts of violence and to enable the Northwest and Southwest regions to regain the necessary serenity for the full development of the people living there, that the head of state decided to convene this major national dialogue.
The talks should last 5 days. According to the United Nations, nearly 2,000 people have been killed since tensions erupted at the end of 2016, when protesters were killed by the police. A year later, armed separatists started an insurgency. Outside the building, some protesters said important leaders had not been invited to the negotiations.
A lot of Anglophone representatives are not inside the building, and yet the authorities will later say they have sorted out their problems. I'm out here with more than 200 Anglophones. This is serious. They must hear of this at the meeting.
Many Anglophones say they are marginalised. They represent just 16% of the population. Some want to return to more federalism, others wish to secede. In August, one of their leaders, Julius Ayuk-Tabe, and 9 of his supporters were sentenced to life in prison for terrorism and secession.
Well, as well as the thousands killed in Cameroon, the fighting's forced around 500,000 people from their homes. Many have also witnessed extreme acts of violence. Our correspondents have headed to one organisation in Yaoundé trying to help victims overcome the physical and emotional trauma caused by the conflict.
He still has scars on his body 1 year after he was attacked and fires set on his body by armed men in the southwest region of Cameroon. Kingsley says he was kidnapped, tortured and fuel poured on him by those he says are separatist fighters.
One of them said, "Give me that petrol." Take the petrol, they sprayed my skin. They light it.
The armed men went on to burn his house, killing his 7-month-old pregnant wife.
I have 2 kids and a wife who was pregnant, 7 months. She was sleeping. She's dead. She burned in the house. If I think of my wife, I think of revenge.
Since then, he has been living with this trauma like other thousands of displaced Anglophones who have taken refuge in the capital, Yaoundé. Most displaced people come to the headquarters of this association to seek solutions. One of the only associations which offers psychological support to nearly 2,000 victims of the Anglophone crisis.
What is causing your heart to be painful, Mr. Kingsley?
She was pregnant.
Pregnant wife? That you lost 2 people?
Yes.
Your wife?
Victims here talk about their worries to minimize the grief they feel. A psychosocial counselor talks to Kingsley as he tries to determine the degree of trauma he has suffered.
If you want to really move ahead, you must leave that past and look in front as you are looking at me.
Like Kingsley, thousands of English-speaking displaced people suffer from psychological disorders. The gravity of their trauma is not completely taken into account by local relief organizations.
They are focused just on giving food to internally displaced persons, maybe giving them clothing, providing them shelter. It is not enough. If we don't target this neglected aspect, we are moving on a blind road.
According to NGOs, thousands of victims of crime, rape and kidnappings need psychological assistance to deal with the atrocities of the underrated 3-year-old Anglophone crisis.
Well, look now at some other news. Somali militant group Al-Shabaab's claimed responsibility for an attack on a US base in the country. Extremists targeted the site at Balidogle with explosives and gunmen early on Monday. The US mission to Somalia says no one was killed. In a separate incident, also on Monday, a convoy of Italian advisors was hit by a car bomb in Mogadishu. There were no injuries. Al-Shabaab's also claimed responsibility there. A Moroccan journalist accused of having had an illegal abortion has been sentenced to a year in prison. Journalist Hajar Raisuni was single when she fell pregnant, although she says that she was married to her Sudanese fiancé under Islamic law and did not have an abortion. She's been jailed since the end of last month. Her arrest sparked a wave of pro-abortion protests across the country. Her family says that her detention is politically motivated. And Nigeria's tech industry's crowdfunding to legally challenge the country's feared special anti-robbery squad known as SARS. The tech community accuses officers of SARS of regularly shaking them down and extorting them. Outrage came to a head after a Lagos-based software engineer said that he'd been beaten and forced to hand over money over the weekend. Engineers say that they're often cynically accused of being internet fraudsters, that the abuse is threatening growth to the crucial industry in the country. Dozens of companies and investors are threatening a class action lawsuit under the banner of #StopRobbingUs. Well, staying in Nigeria, the journalist behind the online #RevolutionNow protest was formally charged with treason, money laundering and harassing the president on Monday. Former presidential candidate Omoyele Sowore pled not guilty to all counts. He runs Sahara Reporters, which is an online platform encouraging people to report corruption and political misconduct. Last week, he remained in detention after authorities ignored a High Court order for his release. Sowore is a fierce critic of President Muhammadu Buhari.
Kept incommunicado for almost 60 days now, and you can see them dragging This is a lawless country, and that is why Nigeria must fight for its soul and ensure that the revolution that gives our people a chance to have a country of their own.
Now, the US is planning on pulling funding from Kenya's National Blood Bank in October, following a decision by US President Donald Trump. It's part of his plans to cut back foreign aid programs in Africa. Kenya now faces a serious health challenge and a race to beef up blood supplies on its own, whilst in the midst of an ongoing shortage. Our correspondents report.
Nairobi's largest public hospital is running low on blood. Hospital management frequently calls for emergency donors, typically the families of patients.
I have come here to donate blood because my wife is pregnant, and that's why I'm here. And I don't come here often, and it is I'm required to come.
About 60% of the blood supply is transfused to mothers and children, often after complications during childbirth. Donors are rare here, and every 10 minutes, approximately 7 people are at risk of death if they don't receive blood.
Most Kenyans don't have the knowledge about blood donation. So in Kenya, most of the time we'll find maybe when we have a disaster or something like that. Otherwise, when they are just told to come and donate, nobody turns up.
In the last 15 years, the U.S. has given more than 6 billion euros to the Kenyan Blood Bank program. Without this, it would have been impossible to collect and analyze blood. Off camera, employees admitted they're scared about the loss of funds, but management struck a reassuring tone.
If you're getting support, that's taxpayers' money from another country, and at some point, we just have to support ourselves as a country.
The government hasn't yet announced a plan to fill the deficit. The Minister of Health is using his platform to organize large-scale donation drives, setting a goal to get closer to the 1 million units of blood the country needs. The day of the drive, the largest donor in Kenya was on hand to help publicize the effort.
We give them awareness, and when you say you fear the needles, if you are a relative or yourself you need blood, where will the blood come? You have to be,
To guarantee adequate stock, about 2% of the population has to donate each year. But with USAID coming to an end, it's impossible to know if and how Kenya's blood bank will continue to operate.
Well, on Monday, Britain's Prince Harry paid tribute to a British soldier who was killed during an anti-poaching operation in Malawi. Matthew Talbot was on patrol with local rangers in Liwonde National Park in May when he was fatally injured by a charging elephant. As Harry unveiled a plaque dedicated to Talbot, he also praised the collaboration between the UK and Malawi in trying to fight against illegal wildlife trading, and he called on more to be done globally to safeguard the environment.
I think it's becoming more and more obvious that actually ecosystems across the world are under massive threat. Somehow we have to be able to accept and learn and appreciate what already exists rather than destroying it and then realising that we need to then recover from it, because we are literally driving ourselves to extinction.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa for now. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.
A colourful patterned material full of history, highly prized in Africa and the Western world, wax-printed fabric is worth its weight in gold. In the 1970s, women from Togo known as the Nana Bens made a fortune with the material. Today, their descendants have taken up the torch and must meet new challenges for the business to survive. Reporters takes you to meet the Nanettes, the princesses of wax prints.